Thanks, everyone, for willing to spend the next 30 minutes with us on our talk. Today, we wanted to talk to you about a newly introduced log source from Microsoft, which is Microsoft Graph API Activity Logs. The goal of the presentation is to make sure that you get familiarized with the log source, and then so that you can go on and perform threat hunting using the Graph API Activity Logs. So there's a little bit about us. So I'm Parthiban. I've been in the security for over 10 years now. Currently working as a senior intelligence analyst at Authentication. I previously worked with my friend Shiva for the past at Symantec and Microsoft and Anomaly. And outside of work, food is something that I really enjoy. And my friend.
And yeah, hi, I'm Shiva. So I also have around 10 years of experience in security. Right now I work for Dart and I'm a senior security researcher. Previously worked in Symantec and Anaplan as well. And I've been around multiple different security roles. And outside of cybersecurity, it's more of gaming.
Cool. So in today's agenda, I wanted to go through a little bit of fundamentals about what is a Microsoft Graph API and how to get these logs as it's brand new. And I wanted to go over through a couple of key fields which you can make use of during your threat hunting or investigation, and also how you can effectively utilize Graph API logs with other data sources. And then we'll also go through a couple of KQL functions that you might find it useful during investigation. And then my friend Shiva will walk you through a couple of real-world attack scenarios that he worked during his time at Dart. And then he'll finish off the session with how to perform baselining and auditing in Graph API logs. So, what is a Graph API? Graph API is not something brand new. It's been around for a while now, but the logging is something that was enabled a bit recently. So using Graph API, one can interact with a wide variety of M365 services, which means you can use a single endpoint to access applications such as OneNote, OneDrive, Calendar. There's so many endless applications that you can do. A simple example would be you can use the API to get the latest emails from your Outlook, or you can also use it to list all your files in OneDrive. So due to the extensive features and ease of use, in the wrong hands, it can be abused by threat actors to perform malicious activities. So as a defender, we should be in a position to detect and respond threats that are happening in the using Graph API. So this screenshot is just a simple example of what you can do with the Graph API. This is a web application from Microsoft. You can just go to akms.ge. That will take you to this page. You can try to explore what different endpoints that you can query and what type of data that it will get back to you. So you can, if you look on the left side, you can get the user profile. Similarly, you can also if you have enough permissions, you can also get information about other users that can be used for enumeration. Similarly, you can also get your emails, like I mentioned, your items from your OneDrive. You can schedule calendar appointments, etc. So lots of applications. So before we move on to how to get these logs, I want to give you another couple of basics around how authentication and permission schemes work in Graph API. In order to access the Graph API, one needs to have an application that needs to be registered in your Azure portal, and that's one of the fundamentals. And then the authentication is done using OAuth protocol, which means you need to be having a client ID and access token to access the API. So once you have these two done, then the next step is to assign permissions to your applications. So in the Graph API world, there are two permission schemes. The first one is delegated access. In this delegated access mode, the user needs to be present and signed in. So let's say if the user is trying to access the latest emails from their using an application, then there will be a sign-in pop-up that will ask them to sign in to access the resource. And in terms of app-only access, it will basically act as its own. So you can consider it as a bot that performs activity in the backend using the permissions that are assigned at the time of creation. So this diagram will summarize how the two different permission schemes work. So in terms of delegated access, when someone is trying to access the resource, let's say in this case, similarly, we can have OneDrive. So the OneDrive resource will ask a couple of questions to the application. The first one is the user authorized to perform this activity? If it's yes, then the next question would be, is the app authorized to perform this activity on behalf of the user? So if both conditions met, then the application will be able to access the contents from the OneDrive. And in terms of app-only access, the only question that will be asked by the resource is the app authorized to perform this activity? Then if the admin has given consent to this application, then the app can access the resource. Now we'll move on to how to get these logs. Firstly, the Graph API activity logs are not collected by default. So you need to enable them. So your administrator need to enable them to collect these logs. The second point here is the logs are only available to Entra ID P1 or P2 license holders. Any other license you wouldn't be able to get access to these logs. And another important thing here is before you start collecting these logs, you need to perform a cost estimation of how much this is going to cost you, because if you have a larger cloud presence and having lots and lots of assets, then you'd be racking up so much bill. So please be mindful about before enabling these logs. And to collect these logs, you can simply go to the Azure portal and then go to Entra ID. And under the Entra ID, you'll have the diagnostic settings, and like one in the screenshot right side, you can see under the diagnostic settings, there will be a number of different log sources. Under that, you can enable Graph API activity logs. And then once you enable it, you can either send it to your preferred data lake, or you can send it to, in this case, we are sending the logs to Log Analytics in Azure. And now, once you have these logs, the next step is to understand what fields are present in the logs. Here are some of the key fields that are present in the API logs. The first important field is the application ID. So this is a unique identifier used per application. So this is going to act as a central pivot point during your investigation. And then the IP address is your source IP address. And then the request method is another important field here, because that's how we will know what type of activity is happening. So for example, if it's a GET request, the app is trying to get data from there, so you can assume it as in some sort of enumeration activity in terms of malicious stuff. So let's say the app can list all the items from your OneDrive, so that's an enumeration. So in terms of post activity, that's basically your app is trying to interact with the resource. So you can consider it as something like an app is trying to send an email. So in this case, your data will be sent to the resource. So that's a post request. And similarly, the response status code is important. So that's how you will be able to differentiate whether this particular activity was successful or not. If it's 200 series, then it's a successful activity. And if it's 400, then there's some sort of error happening. And finally, the request URI, another important field, because that's how you'll be able to know which endpoint the app is trying to hit. So let's say if the endpoint is trying to query items from OneDrive, then you would be able to see the corresponding endpoint in the request URI. So that's how you'll be able to perform investigation on what activities are happening. And we'll also walk you through a couple of useful tips. So on its own, Graph API logs, it's useful, but when you combine it with other data sources, you'll have more context. So that will be super helpful during investigation. So the first one is there is a user ID field in Graph API, but that's just a unique identifier that won't give you any extra context. So if you join it with the identity info table, you can get other context around email address, names, SPNs, etc. So those will be super helpful. And similarly, you can also combine it with the Active Directory risky user. That will provide further context around what type of risk is associated with the user ID. That might help you to type of risks like logging in from a different location, suddenly those sort of extra information you'll be able to find. And there's another table called Cloud App Event Logs that can be used when you're, let's say, you're trying to investigate an activity where the user is trying to download a list of files, but in the Graph API logs, you'll only see the file identifier, but you won't be able to see what's the file name. So if you combine it with the Cloud App Event Logs, you'll be able to get that as well. So that's super helpful. And a couple of useful KQL functions. So the first one is pass URL. So if you pass the request URI, the field that we just talked about, the function will parse the URL into multiple fields. So it will split the URL into domain, subdomain, ports, and it also has the ability to extract the parameters that you're passing in the API. So that will be super helpful to differentiate what type of activities are happening. And finally, the geo IP information. So it's self-explanatory. If you pass the source IP address information in there, that will help you to get context around geolocation information such as city, country information like that. Now I'm going to pass the mic to my friend Shiva, who's going to walk you through real-world attack scenarios.
Yep, thanks, Parthiban. So before we jump into the real-world attack scenario, I just wanted to tell you that all of these scenarios that we are going to see here, it's basically derived from the engagements that we've had in Dart. Dart basically provides instant response as a service to multiple external customers. But that being said, though, all the screenshots that you're going to see here, it's completely a recreated attack from our own test environment, so which means you will not see any sort of customer data anywhere in any of the screenshots. So with the disclaimer out, let's jump in. Basically, we've split the attack scenarios into MITRE matrix so that it's pretty clear for you to understand what's really happening here. And also the queries here, it's basically an excerpt from the actual queries. We wanted to sort of save the real estate of these slides. So if you want the queries, we have added a QR code at the very end of the slide. So feel free to use that, and you'll be directed to an article which has all the queries that is presented here. Yep, so this is one of the most seen tactic. We've observed it in all of the IR engagements. So actors love gathering data. They love elevating privileges. They love trying to figure out where they are and where they want to go. So one of the things that we did here is that to get this query is basically we took a look into all of the engagements that we've been on. We isolated all sort of reconnaissance that happened using Graph API. We pulled all the APIs which is related to reconnaissance, and along with that, we also took a look into all the different tools that is available in the market. Shout out to Graph Runner and Azure Hound. They use Graph API to do a lot of reconnaissance. So we used all of these to basically come up with a dynamic list, basically to add all the API endpoints. And basically using that, we've also added a response. I wish I had a laser, but we also added a response status code here, which is equal to 200, which means it's a successful response. And along with that, what we did was we grouped the whole thing into a time bin of 2 minutes, and we are then looking for sort of a burst activity, which means if there's going to be reconnaissance, it's going to be happening like in a short span of time. So it is going to be like 100 seconds for this query alone. And finally, what we did was we are counting 3 or more unique calls and total call of around 40 or more. Or if the total calls is more than 100, then this is going to create a hit. And again, this is more of completely based on the test scenarios that we did based on our tenants. So which means you will have to adjust your filter attributes for your own tenants for your environment. And of course, since Microsoft Graph API is constantly evolving, you might need to add other endpoints or calls that is made to the dynamic list. Oh, this is another scenario where we notice a service principal of an application that was compromised. So basically, this application had this role management.read-write.directory role. So what this role basically does is it gives this application an ability to assign any sort of role to any sort of user. That is exactly what it does. And in this scenario, or in the attack that we noticed as part of the Dart engagement, basically the actor provided multiple different users with multiple different roles to, of course, proceed with their action on objectives. And we recreated, of course, this scenario. You will see on the right, there is like multiple screenshots. The first screenshot, you see the account name hacker. We have not assigned any sort of roles there. And post which, what we did was we abused this Graph API application, and we provided global administrator, which is on the second screenshot. And this is basically how the logs would look like. You would see what is important here is the IP address, the request URI, the response status codes, and user agent and app IDs. So using this log and all other logs that we found in the research, we were able to come up with something of a simple query where you look into where it figures this request. The request made is equal to post, and for the response code is 204. You would find a hit. One of the things that you have to note here is that the role. If you see the role there, it doesn't really scream to an investigator that it is a global administrator role. That is like one of the biggest cons, I would say, of Graph API logs, Graph activity logs. It doesn't give you all the information right to an investigator. And just like how Parthiban illustrated in the previous slides, you'll have to correlate this log with other logs, such as in this case, it's going to be audit logs, to understand what sort of role this is and what sort of what the user was basically assigned, what sort of role was assigned to the specific user. This was another interesting attempt. So this was an internal lateral movement. And what basically happened here is the actor compromised a user token through a phishing attempt and used it with an delegated permission app. So what basically happens here is the actor basically sends a phishing email. The user clicks it. They give their credentials out, and the user is presented with a consent screen. The consent basically asks for simple access, such as sending an email out. And as soon as the user clicks yes, which an user will do, the app receives this token. The actor uses this token to interact with the Graph API and sends multiple different emails to multiple different phishing emails internally to the user. And what we've done is the first query basically finds all sort of /send mail, which is the request URI there. It is one of the API function which is used to send an email out. And so similarly, the second query is pretty interesting. It establishes a baseline of all the apps using this function. So this gives you a complete eagle-eye view of what is exactly happening in your environment, especially with the /send mail. And this is another similar to the previous slide. So we have seen multiple engagements where actors access mailboxes either by abusing Graph API's delegated or application permission. So let's jump into a test scenario. The threat actor abuses an app with an application permission mail.read.all. And what this does is the mail.read.all, it basically gives an application the ability to read all sort of emails across your entire organization. So if the actor has access to this app and its token and this specific permission in the app, they would be able to read the CEO's email or any sort of emails and any sort of user in your organization. So what we did was, again, another query here. It basically creates a stat of all the applications used for reading emails. And it also provides you a time frame of sorts between a specific time to a specific time when this was read. And it gives you all the targets, or basically all the mailbox that were touched, which means all sort of emails that were read from different people's mailboxes. And of course, a count. So what happens here is that you'll get a clear picture as to different email inboxes that were touched, and by different app IDs. So this gives you clarity about different applications which is using this sort of an feature from Graph API. And yeah, as an investigator, your first thing is to baseline and understand if this is something that's supposed to happen. If it does, then all good. If it is not, then yeah, you'll have to of course spin up an incident. Okay, this is another place where we noticed another incident where we noticed compromised identities accessing files on SharePoint and OneDrive via Graph API. So the permissions used here are files read write and sites read write. And the query, what it does is it's like a pretty simple one. It's a great starting point for investigating Graph API calls related to download activities. So if you take a look into the below image, you would see that this is the log that would be a resultant of such a read or such a download of a file from any sort of users. One of the pain points again of this log is that the one where I have marked it in red, that is the item ID. Basically, that is the item ID resolves to a file name. You would not see that here in the graph. It doesn't tell you which specific file was downloaded. So which means you'll have to correlate this with, over here it is going to be Cloud App Events to really understand what sort of file was touched and what was downloaded. I think that was pretty much the end of real life incidents. There were like multiple complex incidents, of course, we have seen as a part of experience in Dart. But of course, the focus here is to show you guys how powerful Graph API can basically be, and to stress how important it is for you to collect these logs. So what we recommend here is to audit regularly all the intra application that uses Graph API. This sort of reveals you all the excessive permissions or unexpected accesses that happen. And of course, when you see something of this sort, it could possibly mean that a service principal has been compromised. And of course, another thing is basically when you create auditing or baselining, it creates a safe list of applications that is being used in your environment. So with this list, you can continuously monitor to detect the new application that pops up in your environment. And what we have done here in this query is that we've created a data table, and we have sort of listed all sort of permissions and the privileges that comes along with it, and the reason why we feel that it could be a sensitive one. And we used all of this to basically quantify this with an app ID and their respective permissions. So this gives you sort of an eagle eye view of all the different app IDs that is being used and all sensitive roles that is being used for those specific app IDs. And then with this, if you sort of negate all the first-party applications, what happens is you'll get a clear clarity about all different applications which is being used in your environment. So from there on, what you're going to do is trying to understand if those app IDs first is supposed to have these sort of roles. If it is, all good. If it is not supposed to have it, then of course another investigation needs to be spinned up. After which you constantly keep on monitoring such app IDs coming up with new permissions, and each time there's going to be a new permission, it's something that you have to jump on and understand if it is supposed to be there and if it is supposed to have those sort of roles. Okay, quick recap. So we saw what a Graph API is. It is basically a service that connects multiple M365 applications. So we saw how to obtain these logs. One thing that you have to remind is that it's going to be super expensive, especially if you have a massive foothold in cloud. So please make sure to estimate the cost before you start collecting it. So we went over multiple key fields. We looked into a few correlatable tables such as Cloud App Events, audit logs, and then AAD risk users. And then we also looked into a few useful functions which is used during investigations. And then we went over multiple real-world attack scenarios, and of course, a few test scenarios to illustrate all of these to understand better. And we looked into how baselining these applications based on permissions and privileges help us. So if you did stick until now and felt that these Graph API logs could be interesting, something that your organization that doesn't collect, or maybe they collect it and not really using it, we would also highly recommend you to go over different contributions and articles from other researchers as well. These are pretty cool ones. There is one from Cloud Brothers where they have like amazing advanced queries in it. Well, this is it. Thank you for having us. And if you folks have any questions about Graph API, or if you want to know how cool it is to work in Authentication or Dart, feel free to come say a hi. We'll be around here in this room. And I'm leaving you guys a QR code to scan that will take you to the article and the respective queries that we were speaking about. And of course, a shout out to Debug Privilege. Of course, he helped us mentor this whole thing out. Thank you.
Are there any questions in the audience? No further questions? There we are.
Hi guys, thanks. I see this most likely potential tool very attractive for hackers to sneak into organization, read as much as they can, reconnaissance collection, and so on. So I believe that we have to see who has access to Microsoft Graph API to be able to protect that account even more to avoid this from happening. Have you ever seen an attack in which the hacker is exploiting the knowledge that he fetches from there so far? Because it's quite new product, but I believe it's very attractive.
So all of the scenarios that we spoke about, all of those were real life incidents. So everywhere we were able to see an actor performing one of these attacks that we spoke about. It was all from different engagements for, of course, different customers. But basically the point here is that they did access Graph API to do everything that I just said. Yeah. Yep. There's one there.
Thank you for the talk. At the end, or towards the end, you mentioned baselining applications to know what permissions they normally use and if there are any new applications in the environment. Has there been any thought to productizing that in something that's easier for customers to consume? Because, I mean, what you described here, you have to enable the logging, watch out for any additional costs that might incur, tune the query for your environment to know what applications or what permissions you're using. Given that this is such a useful tool for an organizational administrator, has there been any thought to just making this easier for someone to see what applications are in my environment, what permissions are they using, what's changed recently?
So right now there are a few audit logs that appears on the Cloud app and a few other Defender products where you can actually see what sort of applications are existent on your environment and with high privileges and basically stuff like that. Of course, for that, you'll have to know really which one, where to go look for it, which report to go click and really analyze it. And this is more of a shortcut, especially for a security investigator, where you can really run a query and then understand, okay, these are the applications, this is what I have to concentrate on, this is where I have to go look at it, and this is what, these are the applications that I know that, is existent in my environment with the highest privilege, something that I have to keep an eye on, and anything beyond this, anything suddenly pops up beyond what I already know, that is something that I might have to investigate on. So this is sort of like, let us say, a quick fix. Especially for someone who has access to log analytics and who constantly works on these sort of things.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, on top of what my friend said, to make your life a bit easier, there is a web page in Microsoft Documents where they will list all of their first-party applications. So the reason why we didn't include that is because you can't simply whitelist all the first-party applications because there is a way people can use those applications to perform malicious activities. One of the examples is like So you can use a device auth token, so which means that can be used for phishing, and that will be a first-party Microsoft application. So if we whitelist everything, then we might be missing that activity. So like Shiva mentioned, it has to be manual baselining activity just once, and then you can, once you finish it, then it might be a bit easier for you to perform investigation. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, then I would like to thank you very much.